I'm here to introduce our next speaker, who I hope is ready online. He's a good friend of mine and everybody's, and one of the most well-recognized people in the world as a religious leader, a spiritual leader, and a visionary, and a representative of good in the world, I would say. Deepak, it's good to see you. Please take over.
Thank you, Stuart. I just want to clarify, is it 20 minutes or is it 30 minutes? I just want to be on time.
Minutes would be great, please.
20 minutes?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I'm very grateful to Stuart for giving me the opportunity to share these ideas with you. Stuart's a very close friend, and I admire him for all the work he's done on microtubules and all the work he's doing with Sir Roger Penrose. And I have to say, even before I start, that I am not an academic scientist. I'm not an academic philosopher. I am engaged in self-inquiry and spiritual practice. My training is in neuroendocrinology and neuroscience, although I've stayed away from academia for a while. And whatever I say comes from my own conditioning. And ultimately, whatever anyone says here in this conference comes from what we call the conditioned mind, whether that conditioning is cultural, religious, spiritual, economic, scientific, and or whatever. And so ultimate reality is very difficult to understand unless we go beyond the conditioned mind. However, there's a revolution happening right now in science. And if I may show the slides, am I showing the slides or who's showing the slides, please? Who's showing the slides? Okay, now
I did my own slides, Deepak, so probably you were showing them.
Okay, so let me see if I can. They're not showing here, so never mind. I'll do it without the slides. So it's fine. So right now, our scientific method, as we have it in mainstream science, is based on a philosophy of science, which I would call naive realism. And this is not a condescending term. It's just a philosophical term. And naive realism has certain assumptions. And those assumptions are the following. Number one, matter is the ontological primitive of the universe. So everything that we know in existence is force fields. Number one assumption. Number two, that the objective universe, the so-called objective universe, is observer independent. But that's also an assumption because there's no way to prove an observer-independent universe. Number three, there's subject-object split, which is obviously artificial because the subject and the object are both an activity of what we call the universe. And number four, that the human look of the universe is what the objective universe is, not of any other species. So obviously these assumptions are almost impossible to prove, and yet our scientific method works to create technology, to create everything that we call reality, our perceptual experience of reality, including our own perception of our mind and body and what we call the universe. So for the last several years, I have engaged personally in a practice called the direct method. The direct method is, what do I experience before I construct an interpretation of the experience? We understand the sets of not force fields, matter, particles, or gravity. Our direct experience of the world is sensations, sense perceptions, images, feelings, and thoughts. I would summarize all this in one acronym: sensations, which include sense perceptions, images, feelings, and thoughts. If there's any experience outside this, please let me know. But there's no experience outside, once again, SIFT, sensations, sense perceptions, images, feelings, and thoughts. The rest is a human construction and a human modeling. But if I ask myself, is there an unseen color? Is there an unseen sound, unheard sound? Is there an unexperienced flavor or olfactory experience? Is there an unthought thought, unfelt feeling? It seems obvious that everything I experience is a cognitive and perceptual activity in my own awareness, and that is manifesting as colors, shapes, forms, sounds, textures, tastes, smells, feelings, and thoughts. The rest is a modeling, whether it's a scientific modeling or a philosophical modeling or whatever. And right now we have three main domains of understanding what we call fundamental reality. One is a purely matter-only monism, and the objection to that is what we call matter is a convenient construct for perceptual and cognitive activity. So matter-only monism doesn't work for me anyway. The second way of understanding reality is what we call dualism, which violates the laws of thermodynamics. If mind and matter are two separate entities, how do you lift your arm? It starts with a thought. This is a very physical activity. How do you speak? How do you have any experience? So dualism doesn't seem tenable. And the only thing that's left is consciousness-only monism. And in Eastern wisdom traditions, that means consciousness is constantly modifying itself as perceptual and cognitive activity, which we then interpret as mind, body, and universe. Given that in Eastern wisdom traditions, in the non-dual traditions, consciousness is what determines our experience of reality. And in that model, then consciousness conceives, governs, constructs, and becomes the experience of what we call mind, body, and universe, as consciousness modifies itself into mind, intellect, ego, the five subtle senses, the five perceptual activities, the five motor activities, and ultimately projecting that as space, air, fire, water, and earth, the five elements of creation. In this model, reality is different in different states of consciousness. Physiology is different in different states of consciousness. Biology is different in different states of consciousness. Perception is different in different states of consciousness. Cognition is different in different states of consciousness. Emotions, relationships, and everything that we call experience shifts as consciousness evolves. And in this model, there are 7 states of consciousness. So the first 3, everyone's familiar with: waking, dreaming, and sleeping. We go through these states every day. But in the model I'm suggesting, the waking model is a lucid dream in a vivid now, because what we call the waking state is a perceptual activity which is basically ungraspable. Every perception is a snapshot of experience. Every cognition is a thought out of innumerable entangled superpositions of thoughts. So before a thought surfaces, it exists in a field of infinite possibility. And before a perception happens, it also exists in a field of infinite possibilities. So what we call everyday reality as physical reality is a lucid dream in a vivid now. If I asked you what happened to your childhood, you would say it's a dream. But if I asked you what happened to you yesterday, it's a dream. What happens to these words? By the time you hear them, they don't exist. So all we experience is the past. Cognitively and perceptually, it doesn't matter whether the past is 100 million light years away, or as far as the Big Bang, or it's a nanosecond away, but it's still the past. What you experience perceptually is the past. Whether you call it the physical world or your own body. First state of consciousness. Second state of consciousness is the dream you had last night. Third state of consciousness is deep sleep. Fourth state of consciousness is what we call in this model non-local awareness. You transcend the perceptual experience and you suddenly find yourself without any experience of body or mind or the world. And all that is experienced is formless awareness as a field of possibilities, as a field of unpredictability, as a field of non-local correlation or entanglement, as a field of creativity, which is self-regulating, self-evolving, and self-organizing. That's called the fourth state of consciousness, non-local awareness. There's a fifth state of consciousness that gets established when that non-local awareness is fully awake in waking, dreaming, and sleeping. So there's the simultaneity of non-local and local awareness, where there is insight and intuition and epiphanies and revelation, but more importantly, the loss of the fear of death. Because being non-local, you have the ability to silently witness body, mind, and universe as perceptual and cognitive activities of your own self. So everything changes in this simultaneity of local and non-local awareness as an experience. In Eastern wisdom traditions, it is called cosmic consciousness. In this state, your biology is different, your brain waves are different, your inflammatory markers are different, your everything in your body has shifted to self-regulation. In a higher state, and also loss of fear of death. This is the fifth state of consciousness. The sixth state of consciousness is when you can experience non-local reality even in the objects of perception. So not only the subject is fully awake, locally and non-locally, but even the objects of experience are experienced both locally and non-locally. And then there's a seventh state of consciousness, which is basically complete resolution of subject-object split. There is only awareness modifying itself into species-specific minds and cultural-specific minds and conditioned minds that are projecting their own worldviews. Now, having listened to Jeffrey's talk, I think Jeffrey is probably the most advanced researcher in these locations, as he calls them. But these have been mapped out in Eastern traditions, the seven states of consciousness as we understand them. And there are certain milestones in these traditions. First, there's a loss of sense of personal agency. Second, there's effortless spontaneity. Third, mind and body are seen as entangled activities of a non-local awareness. Four, the world is seen as a perceptual activity of that non-local awareness that is modifying itself into species-specific experiences and culture-specific experiences and conditioned mind experiences. And finally, there's the realization that actually there is no physical world. The physical world and even the physical body are human constructs for consciousness modifying itself into mind, intellect, ego, the five subtle senses, the five obviously gross perceptual activities, the five motor activities, and how they project as the experience of what we call space, fire, water, and earth. But ultimately, all that emptiness modifying itself into innumerable experiences. In fact, this model is very consistent with what we call string theories and multiverse theories that are cropping up right now, except that these locations in space-time are actually locations of states of consciousness. The fundamental reason for exploring consciousness through these traditions is they give us an experience which has been actually common to all spiritual traditions, and we can even call it the religious experience. And this religious experience has the following characteristics. Number one, transcendence. Number two, the absence of clinging and grasping. Number three, the absence of recoiling. Number four, a shift in awareness from fear to Platonic values like empathy, compassion, love, joy, equanimity, and most importantly, the loss of the fear of death. So, because that part of you, which is non-local, is not subject to birth and death. That's the essential religious experience. Once again, transcendence, the emergence of Platonic values, truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, love, compassion, joy, equanimity, and the loss of the fear of death. And the way we approach this experience is through practices like mindful awareness of body, mindful awareness of perceptual activity, mindful awareness of mental activity, mindful awareness of the web of relationship, and mindful awareness of awareness itself. Awareness being aware of itself. To be aware of your body, to be aware of your perceptual activity, to be aware of the five senses, to be aware of mental space, and to be aware of the entanglement of experience actually results in a phenomenon called metacognition. And that is the highest intelligence, the ability to observe mental space, ego, mind, intellect, and ego and self-identity as objects of experience, the world as a perceptual activity interpreted as matter, and only one subject of experience, which is non-local awareness, modifying itself into these species, specific minds with their own perceptual activities, which give them the experience of their fragment of the multiverse. So I can stop here just with this final conclusion that the current methods of science based on naive realism are extremely important in helping us create the neural correlates of experience. But the neural correlates of experience themselves are experiences in awareness. They are qualia. Every quantum event is also an entangled qualia experience of sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. And if we go to the source of all qualia, all we find is a non-local awareness. I think what I've expressed to the best of my ability reinforces everything that Jeffrey Martin has presented in his initial presentation. Thanks once again for having me, and thanks, Stuart, for allowing me to share these ideas with you.
Thank you, Deepak.
Thank you.
We have time for a couple of questions. I think Gino had his hand up first. Shout it out, Gino. Oh, here comes the mic.
Gino? Yeah, great to see you guys. And just in terms of these transitions, we're going from kind of like a conditioned mind gradually to an unconditioned mind, which arguably provides access to other forms of knowing, like intuition and insight. Bringing this back to the topic of this conference as well, too, looking at the quantum side of things. From a Taoist perspective, they say when the mind, the body, and the universe are in alignment, things just kind of happen naturally. And so looking at what we've been talking about, microtubules and physiology, and there's a lot of work on trauma release and everything. So is there some correlation between kind of the mind and how it accesses information, the physiology, almost like an antenna that gives them kind of a deeper insight at other forms of knowing that then relate to how things play out in space and time? Now that we're looking at kind of mechanisms down to the quantum level, and there are these kind of maps now where we move from kind of a conditioned belief to, realizations of this wellness. Is there some way we can come up with some kind of like objective physiological measures and come up with some kind of theoretic framework that shows how we can potentially put all of this together and move towards this? Thank you.
A very good question, Gino, and the short answer is yes. if we look at the major revolutions that have occurred in biology in the last 2 decades, I would say they are epigenetics, neuroplasticity, the microbiome, which says that 99% of the genetic information in the body is not even human. And then you have this whole new era of artificial intelligence that puts all these theories together. And all these theories are suggesting that we have non-local dormant potentials, extrasensory perception, that can be activated as we go beyond the conditioned mind. That's number one. But number two, we can measure things like inflammatory markers, we can measure gene expression, and hopefully with AI, we can correlate all of that with what Stuart is also talking about, the activity of the microtubules. So we are looking at a new era where non-local potentials in human beings are going to blossom, extrasensory perception in all its varieties, but we'll also be able to measure the biological correlates through gene expression, inflammatory markers, what we call chronobiology, biological rhythms, activity of the microtubules, but much, much more, because every experience is now becoming measurable. Even the measurements, though, we must realize, are qualia experiences. Just like color is a qualia experience, to look at a neural correlate is a qualia experience. And just like quanta are entangled and in superposition in the field of all possibilities prior to experience, so are qualia superimposed or entangled in that field of infinite possibilities, which is self-regulating, self-evolving, and producing every sensation, image, feeling, thought, which we then conceptualize. And even our desire to inquire into all this is an activity of the same consciousness.
Super. Hi, Deepak. Susan Brown here, if you remember.
I see. Yes, of course.
Great to see you. Because of you, you actually inspired me many years ago to work with you. And we have some people on our team who are also inspired because of you. And they're deep meditators. And we're actually measuring like a flow state when you're in this. And so I'd love for you, from your wisdom, your experience, please describe for us, because we created a soul compass to actually measure when a human is actually flowing the most of their divine, true source energy.
So thank you for asking that question. There's the flow state, which can be sustained in non-local awareness, but we experience those flow states in peak moments as well. Athletes, musicians, in pure love, for example, or any transcendent experience, there's a flow peak experience where the mind becomes silent, where there's no resistance, where everything is in slow motion, and you experience what is the so-called out-of-body experience, where you see your body, mind, intellect, ego as all cognitive and perceptual activities of yourself. That sustained flow state in spiritual traditions is called freedom from suffering. So there are two extremes. One is extreme resistance, which we call stress. So stress is, you might say, resistance to existence by imposing constructs on what is, as Jeffrey said in his initial talks. And the flow state is actually identifying only with consciousness as modifying itself into the field of all experience. So in the Upanishads, there's a phrase, one phrase, I am the field and I am the knower of the field. It's very similar to the quantum field, the description, I am the field and the knower of the field, except the field is aware of itself. And so there's existence and there's awareness of existence, and they're synonymous, because existence and awareness of existence go together. If there's no awareness of existence, then there's no experience of existence. So awareness, existence, and self or joy or flow all go together. And actually, we are putting together a paper through meta-analysis, similar to what Jeffrey has done, looking at all people who have had these persistent flow states and seeing their commonalities. And the commonality is choiceless awareness. Choiceless awareness means just being, no feeling, no thinking, no doing, just being and observing the feeling, doing, thinking, and perceiving as spontaneous activities of being. And through effortless spontaneity, there's no doing involved at all.
We'll take one or two more questions. Let me just say we have a little extra time, so we'll have time for Aaliyah Grigg because we have a cancellation in the following
Sure.
session. So Morris Friedman.
Great talk. I have a question. You mentioned that everything that we perceive is in the past, but I'd wonder about your thoughts about perceiving the future in the sense of planning. In fact, one of the theories for why we developed memory, episodic memory, is not so much to remember the past, but to be able to plan the future. So we use our memories to go in both directions, planning and remembering. So how does that relate to your comment about we only experience the past and not the future?
This is a very interesting question, and I have been intrigued by the same question for a long time. So, what I did was recently, I went on ChatGPT and I asked the following question. Then I went to Bard and I went to the Google apps and all these. There's so many artificial intelligence apps that can give you, a summary of all that's known. So I asked the question, since we know entanglement already exists in space, we know that. And the Nobel Prize went to entanglement in space. You have two particles that are apart, and they could be apart as far as possible, millions of light years away, and they're still entangled. You measure one, you immediately know what the other particle is doing. This non-local correlation, which seems to be signal-less, unmediated, and unmitigated and instantaneous. So I asked the AI people, all these AI groups now that are there, if there's entanglement in space, is there entanglement in time? Because space-time are one entity. And I got very interesting answers. Some AI said, no, there's no proof of entanglement in time. And then some AIs said, obviously, since space-time are one thing, there's entanglement in space-time. They're all past, present, and future are non-locally correlated. And so the answer to your question is both memory and imagination are entangled in that same non-local field of possibilities. But what we call the present is not in time. The present is not in time. As soon as experience happens, time happens. Now, cognitively and perceptually, we only experience the past, but in imagination, we create the future, which is based on our memory of the past. And if we do believe in non-local entanglement, it has to be both in space and time.
I have a question. On this topic of cosmic consciousness, you kind of put that as the far reaches of consciousness. And what I want to understand is there a loci, a center of consciousness at that point?
If consciousness is non-local,
right,
it doesn't have a form. Form means it doesn't have a boundary, and therefore it must be infinite. And if it is infinite and non-local and not in space-time, and even space-time are emergent properties, then I don't see a location for consciousness.
So the witness of this is what?
The witness is, this is not a person. The witness, even the person, is a process in that witness. So I mentioned this phrase, which comes from the Upanishad. I am the field and I am the knower of the field. And so the field is you could say similar to the quantum field, but it is self-aware. And it is not a person. The person is a process, just like any biological organism is a process in that field. So it's totally impersonal. And then there's another teaching in the same Upanishad. It says, meditate on your body as the universe and having the nature of awareness, which is very profound, by the way, because you know your body only as awareness. You don't know it as an object. I know my body as a perception, the alchemy of the five senses, and how I construct that experience in my mind. So this body, with its sensations, images, and perceptions, is also an experience, and then non-local awareness. And that non-local awareness and this body-mind and the universe are a unified experience, but only a unified human experience, not the experience, say, of a dragonfly that has 30,000 eyes. What does the world look like to that dragonfly? I have no idea.
Hi, Deepak. My name's David Cherniak. I'm a documentary filmmaker. We've been in touch through our mutual friend, Minas Kapatas. My question revolves around the emergence of consciousness from the fundamental ground of awareness, non-localized awareness you're talking about. This conference has talked a lot about the collapse of the wave function. Where do you locate the collapse of the wave function in that process of movement from fundamental awareness to dualistic awareness that we need to operate in the world?
I would suggest, and you probably already have read, but if you haven't, I would suggest that you read Schrodinger's book, What is Life? And basically, when I read that, I thought of the collapse of the wave function is actually influenced by memory. The previous collapse determines the statistical likelihood of the next collapse. So that's why we call it a probability. The collapse of the wave function is a probability wave for a space-time event in consciousness that we then call, a particle. So a particle is actually a space-time event in consciousness. It's similar to something that Stewart calls the Bing, that moment of experience in which both subject and object split. Before that, there's no subject-object split. So the collapse of wave function in Eastern wisdom traditions would be interpreted as karma. Now, that gets very esoteric because karma is simply habits of conditioned mind that result in certain space-time events. And so those conditioned mind habits of the past determine the statistical likelihood of space-time events in the future. And Schrodinger's wave function is actually quite unique because in a way it predicts or, it tells us how every atom in the universe is created. Every particle in the universe is created. And yet before that particle appears, it's in a superposition with every other particle in the universe. The Vedanta would go only one step further. Those things that you call particles are actually entangled qualia in the field of all possibilities. And qualia is what creates the experience of mind and body and universe. Even the neural correlates are qualia. And they're entangled. So before a thought appears or before a feeling appears, it is entangled as in the qualia field as all possibilities. Just give you an example. Let's say I have the thought of my mother. Immediately, as soon as I have the thought of my mother, I see her image in awareness. There's no image in the brain, but I see her image. I can even smell her skin. I can remember the songs she used to sing to me. All by thinking of mother, suddenly a whole plethora of experiences that were entangled as qualia possibilities suddenly show up as the experience of what we call mind, body, and the world.
All right, we got to wrap it up. Deepak, thank you so much. You were enlightening and illuminating as always, and it's great to see you. And thank you.
Thank you. I hope to see you soon, and congratulations on all the wonderful work. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. See you.
Bye.